Today, we're recapping the children's fantasy movie Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Jake Portman lives a very normal life. In fact, that's kind of his thing, being normal. We see a perfect example of this one day when he's at work, stacking shelves in a supermarket, and a girl he apparently has a class with doesn't even recognize him. That's embarrassing. And to make Jake's life even more pathetic, one day, after work, his father forgets to pick him up. A coworker drives him home, and on the way, Jake calls his grandfather, Abe, to see if maybe he's available. But when Abe answers the phone, he begins to rant about it not being safe, like a crazy person, and warns Jake away. Worried now, Jake asks if he can be dropped off there instead. So he arrives at his grandfather's house to find the windows smashed and his grandfather missing. It looks like a burglary, but then Jake spots blood trailing outside, not to mention the wire fence torn in half. For some bizarre reason, Jake decides to go towards the obvious danger. And it's no surprise when he finds his grandfather dead in the woods. Wait, not dead. His grandfather's still alive somehow, although he's strangely missing his eyes. As Jake calls out for help, his grandfather rambles incoherently. He mentions an island that Jake must go to, a loop of some kind, and a date, September 3rd, 1943. Before he can say anything else or make any sense of it all, his grandfather dies. Now, sometime later, Jake's in therapy. He's convinced himself that he must be crazy and that his grandfather's death was normal. He even explains that the police concluded it being the result of stray dogs that broke in and bit his grandfather, leaving him to bleed out. Totally explainable, nothing to see here. But still, Jake isn't so sure. He describes in detail how close he and his grandfather actually were. As a child, his grandfather used to tell him about this magical house that they lived in as a boy, one run by a strange woman called Miss Peregrine. This house was home to a group of special children with varying abilities, such as super strength and even the ability to fly, just to name a few. The story seemed so real that even Jake began to believe him. Clearly, his grandfather did. So the next few days are hard for Jake, culminating in a birthday he doesn't want to celebrate. And as he hides out, one of his relatives hands him a present, a book they found amongst his grandfather's things. Before we go on, like the video, smash the subscribe button and turn on that notification bell to get that full day of good luck. The book was addressed to Jake, and in the book is a postcard from none other than Miss Peregrine herself. The postcard is only 2 years old, and Jake proposes that he go and visit her as a means to get some much-needed closure. His parents aren't so sure, but Jake's therapist pushes them over the edge. And so it is that Jake and his father head to Wales together so that they can track down this supposed magical home for children. And finally, Jake can prove whether or not his grandfather was insane. The town that they stay in is small and near deserted, and that goes double for the pub. But Jake manages to find some local boys to take him to the house. When he arrives there, however, he finds the house in a state of squalor and completely abandoned. It turns out that the house was bombed during the Second World War and hasn't been repaired or lived in since. Maybe his grandfather really was a liar. So naturally, Jake's pretty upset by this, but even still, something isn't sitting with him right. He sneaks back to the house the next day, and this time, he goes inside and has a look around. And as he's doing all this, he notices someone watching. Actually, many someones. They're dressed oddly, and are creepy enough that when Jake runs from them, it feels justified. That is until he falls over, hits his head, and passes out. So when Jake wakes up, he's outside of the house and surrounded by a group of people that, strangely enough, he actually recognizes. They're the children from his grandfather's stories. Olive, who can set things on fire, is there. So is Millard, who can turn invisible. The twins whose faces are covered for an unknown reason. And of course, Emma, a girl who can fly and manipulate the air. It's not surprising that Jake is more than a little shocked by this. And the fact that these children are still children. They don't give much away, but tell him that Miss Peregrine is waiting, and they drag him into a cave where they say they have to go into the loop. Once inside, strange noises start to freak Jake out. And as is typical with Jake, he flees. So he's running back to town, to the pub, where he's surprised to find it full of patrons. Even stranger, no one seems to know who he is or what he's doing there. In fact, they start to accuse him of being a spy. Things look bad when suddenly plates and glasses begin to fly about the pub as if by magic. They smash into the walls and over people's heads, causing mass confusion. Jake watches on in shock when Olive pops up, grabs his hand and drags him outside to where the others are waiting with a horse and carriage. This time, Jake goes with him without a fuss. The children take Jake back to the house, explaining that it's September 3rd, 1943. All day, every day. They're stuck in a time loop, which is why no one at the pub knew who Jake was. The house itself is gorgeous, magical in color and design, a stark contrast to the rest of the world we've seen so far. Jake approaches the front door, and Miss Peregrine opens the door and greets him, as if she were expecting his arrival. She takes Jake for a walk through the house, explaining the situation to him as broadly as she can without giving too much away. Apparently, the world is home to a small number of people known as peculiars. These are children with magical powers who also happen to be persecuted by other jealous types. As such, peculiars like Miss Peregrine, who is called an imbrine and has the ability to control time, has created safe houses like this one throughout different periods of time to keep the children safe. They find Emma out by a tree, and when Miss Peregrine leaves him alone, we get a little bit of awkward flirting. Nothing too exciting yet, but Emma implies that she thinks Jake should stay, even though he thinks he isn't peculiar enough to. But that night, Jake stays for dinner. Everyone seems happy with Jake being there, except for a child named Enoch, who's clearly jealous. He has feelings for Emma, even though Olive has feelings for him. He makes it pretty clear too, being super rude to Jake, to such a degree that Jake has to assure everyone he has no intention of staying. Now later that night, Jake's invited to watch the loop reset. They all wander outside with gas masks and look to the sky as a series of bomber aircrafts fly over the house and drop a bomb right on top. Just before the bomb hits, Miss Peregrine fiddles with her watch and time suddenly starts to go backwards. Everything reverses at hyperspeed until they're literally standing in the previous night 24 hours earlier. It was a good time, but it has to come to an end. Before that though, Jake sneakily finds a letter from his grandfather addressed to Miss Peregrine, and he steals it. Jake then says his goodbyes and Emma walks him back out of the loop. He pushes Emma for more answers, but she's closed up and obviously sad to see him go. Just before he leaves, Emma finds another imbrine injured. She thinks it's a peculiar too and rushes off to get it back to the house, leaving Jake to go on by himself. When Jake arrives back in his time, his father wants to know where he's been all day. Jake lies and says he was hanging out with some local kids, but the lie soon unravels when they bump into said children. And worse than that, they accuse Jake of killing dozens of sheep on their farm. The sheep were slaughtered like animals, and although Jake's father doesn't think he did this, he's still concerned. Jake doesn't have a choice but to tell his father everything, who naturally doesn't believe him. And as such, he demands that Jake not leave his sight for the rest of the trip. So the next day they go bird watching together, and a local ornithologist just happens to be in the area. This puts Jake's father in a bad mood, which adds to the depression of the day in general. That night, however, Jake reads the letter he stole from his grandfather to Miss Peregrine. And in it, the grandfather explains that another loop has been attacked in London, England. Jake knows he has to warn her. He escapes that night and finds his way back to the loop and the house. When he warns Miss Peregrine of the letter, she becomes upset and refuses to discuss it with him further. As such, Jake goes to Emma, who says that she can take him somewhere private that she goes to be alone. This private space is a literal sunken ship in the middle of the ocean. In order to get to it, both Emma and Jake must swim down its depths, where Emma can use her power to clear the water from each room so that Jake can properly breathe. It's there that Emma has hidden a secret box from Jake's grandfather. Now in this box is a map that has all the locations of other loops. There are also a series of photos of men with wide eyes. Emma explains that these are bad peculiars who raided loops and killed the children in them. Jake's grandfather hunted these men down in order to stop them, but retired when Jake was born. Now Jake wants to know more, but she's not saying it. And from there, Emma takes Jake outside to the edges of the property, and they witness Miss Peregrine shooting down a large monster. It's invisible to Emma and everyone else, but Jake sees it perfectly. This is his gift. And now finally, Miss Peregrine explains everything to Jake. Once upon a time, there were a group of peculiars who wanted to live outside of time loops, but still be immortal. The leader of this group, the Baron, theorized that the power to control time, held by the inbreeding Miss Peregrine and others, might hold the key. So, the Baron experimented on the inbreeding, accidentally turning him and his followers into monsters called hollows. Now, these monsters are invisible to everyone but Jake. Eventually, the Baron realized that by eating the eyes of peculiar children, he could turn back into himself. And as such, the hollows now hunt loops so they can eat the eyes of the peculiar children. Miss Peregrine theorizes that the Baron led a hollow to Jake's grandfather. It's now that the inbreeding that Emma found earlier wakes up. Her name is Esmeralda, and she explains that the Baron raided her loop and killed everyone there. And worse than that, he's setting up an experiment in her loop similar to last time, where they'll capture more inbreeds and attempt to give themselves true immortality. They must be stopped. Miss Peregrine sees the danger and decides that it's time that they leave their loop and set up a new one. Jake realizes that he has to go home, otherwise he'll be stuck here forever. Emma's furious, citing his ability to see the hollows as a reason to stay, because he's peculiar just like them. But he's scared, and he doesn't know what to do. And in typical Jake fashion, he goes home. So he arrives back in his time to find a dead body, a sign that the hollows are in the area. So he freaks out and runs back into the loop to warn the others, but is followed by the ornithologist who sees him leaving. The ornithologist follows him into the loop, revealing himself to actually be the Baron, as well as his psychiatrist among others. And he forces Jake to take him into the house. So in the house, the Baron uses Jake to force Miss Peregrine into a birdcage, so that she can't use her powers. He then shuffles the children into a room and locks the door, while making sure to tell them that a hollow is on their way for them all. Yum yum. To make matters even worse, the loop will be ending soon, which means that a bomb will be dropping on the house also. The hollow comes, and together the children attempt to fight it off. Of course, only Jake can see it, and although he has a crossbow, he's an awful shot. But he manages to wound it, and the children hurry from the house. Above, they're hearing the sound of approaching planes, the hollow chasing them. They run to the roof, climb outside, and make a run for a nearby tree. The hollow's on them. Jake shoots it back, the children escape, and just as the bomb falls, Emma takes off her shoes, and she and Jake float to the ground, leaving the house, the hollow, and the bomb in their wake. Now, the hollow might be dead, but the danger is long from over. Miss Peregrine has been taken, and the kids know it's on them to rescue her. Unfortunately, she's in London, and with no boat to get them there, wait, Jake has an idea, and it's just crazy enough to work. Using Emma's abilities, they go to the boat hidden in the depths of the ocean, and she clears the water out, allowing it for it to float and take them on their way. They track down where the Baron has taken Miss Peregrine, and there are 4 other evil peculiars with them, as well as 4 hollows. The situation looks hopeless, but Jake has a plan. He lures the hollows out to the pier, and the children use their abilities to take them out. First, they cover the invisible hollows in snow and cotton candy. Then Enoch uses his powers to create an army of skeletons to attack them. It's an epic battle, and the hollows are overwhelmed and taken down. The children run in to save Miss Peregrine, but are forced to deal with the Baron and his friends first. As with the hollows, they use their powers to overwhelm them. Emma blows a wind tunnel to trap the Baron. The twins remove their masks to turn one of the others to stone. Enoch creates a giant elephant to crush another. Unfortunately, the Baron is wily and escapes downstairs to finish his experiment. Jake beats him there, but in order to try and trick the others, the Baron turns into Jake. He tries to convince them to kill the real Jake, and it looks like it might work, but then Jake sees a hollow approaching. He's the only one who can. He moves about so that the Baron, looking like him, is standing right in front of it. And then he lets the hollow eat the Baron. The Baron screams as he's being killed, and Jake finishes the job by finally landing a shot with the crossbow, then freeing Miss Peregrine and the others. With Miss Peregrine free and the children safe once more, it's time for Jake to go home. It's bittersweet though. As they killed the Baron in 1943, then that means his grandfather would be alive. But it also means that he'll be leaving them all behind. And without knowing where their new loop is going to be, he may never see the children and Emma again. But he has no choice and goes home to many tears. So Jake's grandfather is alive, and Jake tells him the entire story, ending with his disappointment that he won't be able to find them again. But his grandfather reminds him that, yeah, he might not know where they are, but he knows where they were. He just has to go to them. So Jake does just that. He spends the next year hopping through time, using the time loops until he finds one close to 1943. This allows him to run and meet where he left the children on the pier, and he gets there just as they're about to leave. The first thing he does is kiss Emma. Way overdue. And then together, along with the children and Miss Peregrine, they set sail to start a new adventure together. This was a recap of the film Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, produced by 20th Century Fox and released in 2016. Directed by Tim Burton, it stars Asa Butterfield, Eva Green, and Samuel L. Jackson. Some pretty cool powers among these peculiars. Which power would you want for yourself? Let us know with the hashtag CinemaRecap in the comments.